Acts 1, 9 through 11. We're just about ready to get into the history of our church, but the curtain is about to fall on the Lord's earthly ministry and with his ascension into heaven. So I want to focus on that somewhat today and then carry on into next week with some final thoughts on that. In Acts 9, or 1, 9 to 11 reads, and when he had spoken these things, while they beheld, he was taken up, and a cloud received him out of their sight. And while they looked steadfastly toward heaven as he went up, behold, two men stood by them in white apparel, which also said, Ye men of Galilee, why stand ye gazing up into heaven? This same Jesus, which is taken up from you into heaven, shall so come in like manner as ye have seen him go into heaven. So, the ascension of the Lord is bringing to a close his earthly physical ministry. And early on in the church, very early in the church, a heretical thought or notion came into a being, which was called Gnosticism. And the Gnostics, it's really hard to wrap your arms around the Gnostic beliefs. They have various permutations and various strange things that they believe. But in a nutshell, at least as it pertains to Christ, I wanted to just kind of look at it a little bit, because they argue against the bodily resurrection and different things. And so I just wanted to look a little bit at Gnosticism as it pertains to Christ and his physical ministry on earth. First of all, the basic belief, they believe first that there are really two creators. There's a good creator and a bad creator. The good creator made everything that is spiritual. So then they also believe there was a bad creator who made everything that is physical. So they extrapolate this into believing that all that which is spiritual is the only thing that is good, everything that is physical is evil. So based on that, they engage in a lot of aesthetic practices where they deny the body, they starve themselves, they do all kinds of things to punish the flesh, hopefully reaching this point where they are no longer so much physical, but they're more spiritual, and they are trying to transcend their physical nature in pursuit of the spiritual thing. They believe that salvation comes through enlightenment, in which one breaks free from the physical and achieves the goodness of the spiritual. And so they also say that since everything that is physical is evil, they deny the fact that Jesus Christ had an actual physical existence. They will teach that his existence may have been spiritual, and that his existence was actually only in a phantom body. It wasn't a true physical body, but it was a spiritual body, and he being Christ, the Son of God, would not have come to earth in a physical body, because according to them, everything that is physical is evil. So, all aspects of Christ's physical nature are rejected by the Gnostics, and Gnosticism was one of the very early heresies that began to infect and creep into the church, and much of 1 John deals with some of these things. They deny the physical birth, the physical death, the physical resurrection, and so on. So 1 John 1, 2 addresses this to a certain extent. That which was from the beginning, which we have heard, which we have seen with our eyes, which we have looked upon, and our hands have handled, of the word of life. For the life was manifested, and we have seen it and bear witness, and show unto you that eternal life, which was with the Father and was manifested unto us. So John is declaring that Jesus Christ was physical. They handled him, they saw him, they were with him. He was, in actuality, a physical being during his earthly ministry. 1 John 2, 2 and 3, who is a liar but he that denieth that Jesus is the Christ? He is Antichrist that denieth the Father. Whosoever denieth the Son, the same hath not the Father, but he that acknowledgeth the Son hath the Father also. 1 John 4, 1 and 3, beloved, believe not every spirit, but try the spirits, whether they are of God, because many false prophets are gone out into the world. Hereby know we the Spirit of God. Every spirit that confesseth that Jesus is come in the flesh is of God. And every spirit that confesseth not that Jesus Christ is come in the flesh is not of God. And this is the spirit of Antichrist, whereof ye have heard that it should come, and even now already is it in the world. So John, in 1 John, addresses certain aspects of this belief of Gnosticism, and he corrects it, and says that Jesus Christ actually was a physical individual. He had a physical body. He was not just spiritual and with a phantom body, but he had a physical, fleshly existence among us during his earthly ministry. So, the ascension, I believe, underscores his physical nature. His ascension is a physical, bodily, visible resurrection that the the disciples experienced personally themselves. I just want to go back and just kind of highlight some of the things regarding Christ's physical ministry on earth while he was among us, among the disciples. First of all, we see that Jesus came to earth in a physical body, and he was born to a physical mother, both in Matthew 2:1 and Luke 2:7. They recount the physical nature of his birth, that he actually came into the world with a physical body through his mother Mary. He lived a physical life. In Luke 2:21, 24, 41, and 52, we see the accounts that tells us that he grew in stature and wisdom. He grew in his humanity. He grew as a human would have grown. He grew in wisdom. We see him living a physical life. We see an account of him where Mary and Joseph accidentally leave him behind in the temple, and they're searching for him. He's in the temple, being questioned and answering questions by those that are there. And we see the physical life of Jesus early on in his life. He also engaged in a ministry that really was a very physical ministry. If you look at through the scriptures, you'll find that in much of his interaction, he's actually touching people, or he's being touched by them. There was a physical interaction between Christ and those to whom he was ministering. Matthew 8, so I can get it up real quick. Matthew 8:3, in dealing with a leper, it says, and Jesus put forth his hand, and he touched him, saying, if thou wilt, be thou clean. And immediately his leprosy was cleansed. Jesus, in his physical body, reached out and touched the leper, who was at that time an outcast of society. Jesus did not fear touching this man, and he touched him in order to bring healing to him. Matthew 8:15, we see that he raises Peter's mother. In Matthew 8:15, we see that, and he touched her hand, and the fever left her, and she arose and ministered unto them. He heals Peter's mother with a physical touch. He physically touches her. And again, speaking to the fact that he had this physical body while he was on the earth. Mark 7:33, we see another account where he restores the hearing of a deaf man by putting his finger in his ears. And he took him aside from the multitude and put his fingers into his ears, and he spit and touched his tongue. And looking up to heaven, he said unto him, Epaphatha, and that is, be open. And straightway his ears were opened, and the string of his tongue was loosed, and he spake plain. So that again, Christ is physically touching those that he's healing and coming into contact with. I think I need my glasses for some of my reading here. I'm kind of getting a little fuzzy. Say again? How about if I put my mic on? That might help too. Okay, is that better? Luke 4:40. We again see his laying of hands on those for healing. And now when the sun was setting, all they that had any sick with diverse diseases brought them unto him, and he laid his hands on every one of them, and he healed them. He also lived a typical physical life. Luke 2. (21 to 24). According to Jewish law, it says here that when 8 days were accomplished for the circumcision of the child, his name was called Jesus, which was so named of the angel before he was conceived in the womb. And when the days of her purification according to the law of Moses were accomplished, they brought him to Jerusalem to present him to the Lord.
As it is written in the law of the Lord, every male that openeth the womb shall be called holy to the Lord, and to offer a sacrifice according to that which is said in the law of the Lord, a pair of turtle doves or young pigeons. So according to Jewish law, Jesus submitted to the physical rituals of the Jewish of the law by being circumcised and being brought into the temple and then having the sacrifice offered for him. And then down 41 to 51. And this is the account where they lose track of him at the Feast of the Passover. His parents went to Jerusalem every year at the Feast of the Passover. When he was 12 years old, they went up to Jerusalem after the custom of the feast, and when they had fulfilled the days, as they returned, the child Jesus tarried behind in Jerusalem, and Joseph and his mother knew not of it. But they, supposing him to have been in the company, went a day's journey, and they sought him among their kinsfolk and acquaintance. When they found him not, they turned back again to Jerusalem, seeking him, and it came to pass that after 3 days they found him in the temple, sitting in the midst of the doctors, both hearing them and asking them questions. And all they that heard him were astonished at his understanding and answers. And when they saw him, they were amazed. And his mother said unto him, Son, why hast thou thus dealt with us? Behold, thy father and I have sought thee sorrowing. He said unto them, How is it that ye sought me? Wist ye not that I must be about my Father's business? So we have a typical interaction again between the Lord and his family after they've lost track of him, and they find him being questioned and answering questions of these individuals in the, I believe it was in the temple. And then Jesus lived in the context of a typical physical family in Matthew 12, 46 and 47, and Luke 8, 19 and 21. We see reference to the fact that he had brethren and his mother. They desired to see him. So we know that he had a physical family. He had half-brothers, and the scriptures attest to that. We see in Matthew 21, 12 to 16, Mark 11, 5 to 17, Luke 19, 45 to 48, and John 2, 13 to 17. And when Christ was moved by righteous indignation, he became very physical. He made the whip of cords, and he physically drove those out of the temple who were selling and buying and profaning the temple with their commerce. And so he became very physical when he was angry over what he saw in the temple. We also see in Mark 4:38 and Luke 8:23 that we have the account of when the disciples are in the boat and a great storm overtakes the boat. And Christ during this time is at the back of the boat sleeping. He has a physical need for sleep because he is in a physical body. We also see in Mark 14, 3 to 9, Luke 7, 37, 38, and John 12, 3. We see the account of when Christ is anointed by the fragrant oils in his physical body. I believe it was Mary and others. They break these vessels of costly oil and anoint his body. And in his physical body, the fragrance must have permeated the room where Christ was when these things occurred. We also see in his physical body, Jesus is grieved, he mourned, he agonized. He wept over Jerusalem. He wept at the grave of Lazarus. And we also see that he agonized in the Garden of Gethsemane so that he sweat great drops of blood. In his physical body, he experienced all the torments of body, soul, and spirit that a normal human being would experience. And we say in John 4:7, the account where he's with the woman at the well, in his physical body, Jesus thirsted. He says to the woman, give me to drink. And then John 13, 1 to 12, we have the account where at the Last Supper, Jesus lays aside his garments and he washes his disciples' feet. He physically handles the bodies of his disciples. They feel his touch. He touches them as he's washing their feet and demonstrating to them that he, as the God of the universe, if he is willing to condescend to perform this act, this lowly act on them, then how much more should they do it to one another? But he physically handles their bodies at the time, and they would have felt him physically touching him as a physical individual. And then we see Jesus was arrested, bound, and accused in his physical body. He was arrested and bound and accused in his physical body, so in our physical body and in our spiritual body, we are made justified before Christ. So, let's see. And then he also suffers abuse in his physical body. In his physicality, he is abused. All these accounts in the Gospels tell us that he was scourged, he was beaten, he was mocked, he was hit on the head with a reed. They crowned him with a crown of thorns. So it was again in his physical body that he suffered this abuse on our behalf. It was also in his physical body that he suffered death. And it was necessary for our own salvation that he physically die as a human, physical individual. And in all of these accounts, they tell us that he gave up the ghost, or he passed, or he died. And in his body, on his way to the cross, he is compelled in his body to carry his cross, at least for a certain way, until Simon of Cyrene is compelled to carry it for him. They give him vinegar and gall to deaden his senses, so in his body he was experiencing all the agonies of the cross. They stripped him naked. The medieval artist who put a cloth strategically placed there in their depictions of the crucifixion are actually wrong. I believe that Christ was actually, they took all of his clothing, and it was customary for those who were being crucified to lie there totally exposed to the elements. And we also see that on the cross he thirsted. And we also know that in his physical body, it was the shedding of his blood that brought our redemption. He bled from physical, actual wounds. Then he suffered a physical burial. He was buried according to Jewish custom. He was put into a physical tomb. He was physically wrapped in linens. And as a part of the wrapping in the linens, these spices of myrrh were worked into the linens as they wrapped him and laid him in the tomb. Again, a physical body that they're preparing for the burial. And we also know that Pilate was satisfied and that Christ had been physically certified to be dead. There was an actual physical death that Pilate was convinced was in fact true. And then as they removed him from the cross, he was a lifeless physical body, and it would have probably taken quite some effort to bring him down. And then we see that his resurrection was physical. He had a physical resurrection. Matthew 28, Mark 16, Luke 24, and John 20. They all speak of the physical bodily resurrection of Christ, albeit the body is now changed and glorified, but there still is a physical bodily resurrection. And this resurrection was preceded by a physical earthquake. It was announced or preceded by this earthquake. As a result of it, the guards physically fainted at the sight of what was going on. The tomb was found empty. There was an angelic announcement. And then throughout his 40 days, he was seen by his disciples. They saw him. They handled him. He invited them to handle him, to put their hands into his side, to put their fingers into the nail prints in his hands. So again, he's physically handled by his disciples. They are convinced beyond all doubt that he has actually physically risen from the dead. He ate with his disciples, again demonstrating to them that he is physically resurrected. It's not just a ghost or a spirit, but he has risen in body. And during this time, he's teaching his disciples on the road to Emmaus. He is instructing them from Scripture. And then he closes his earthly ministry with a tangible physical ascension. And his ministry on earth is coming to an end. This was personally witnessed to and attested by his disciples. Now, there is a false teaching. I think Joseph Smith is one of them. They teach that Christ, after his resurrection, somehow just went away to a quiet place and then lived a normal life. He married, had children, and died a normal natural death. Joseph Smith claims to be an actual physical descendant of Jesus from his line, but the disciples were witnesses to the fact that this was not true, and that he was physically elevated into heaven. So his ascension was bodily, literally, and visibly seen by his disciples. And as I said, he did not go away to raise a family and die a natural death, as some contend. And are there any questions? I'm done a little early today, but next week we'll look at some of the aspects of the resurrection pertaining to his return and the angelic announcement. Any questions or comments on what we've done?